Hey, small groups, we just kicked off a brand new series called UnAfraid. And this weekend, Chad talked about unafraid to jump. If you weren't here this weekend, Chad jumped out of an airplane in Israel, and then we talked about the story of Peter walking on water. If you're not familiar with the story, here's basically how it goes. The disciples are sent out onto the Sea of Galilee. Jesus stays back and just sends them to go across. And the disciples, they're a little bit nervous. It's late at night. Jesus is going to go meet them on the other side. And so Jesus is just going to do what Jesus can do, and that's walk across the water, go right by him, and meet him on the other side. But then they see him, and they become terrified, which, if you think about it, any one of us in that moment, if we were out on the water and it's a little bit creepy and the sun hasn't come up yet, a little bit dark, and we see a figure walking across the water, we'd get a little bit unnerved as well. And so the disciples think, this has got to be a ghost. This is terrifying. This isn't natural. There's something wrong here. And then Jesus calls out to them. He says, you guys don't have to be afraid. It's me. And then they say, well, if it really is you, then tell us and confirm, because we're pretty terrified right now. Jesus says, yeah, it's okay. And Peter says, if it is you, tell me to come out onto the water with you. So Peter gets real bold all of a sudden, and Jesus gives him this real simple invitation. Jesus says, come. One word, just come on. He doesn't explain what's going to happen. It doesn't explain how everything's going to work. He just invites him to get on the water. So Peter climbs out of the boat, and he's standing on water. What an incredible moment that he's experiencing something that nobody else in the history of mankind has experienced apart from Jesus. And he's standing on the water, but then he starts to lose focus. He starts to look around at the wind and the waves and everything around him, and he starts to sink. So now here he is thinking he's going to drown in the wind and the waves in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. And he cries out to Jesus, save me. Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus rescues him, takes him onto the boat, and says, why are you guys so full of doubt? Why don't you guys trust in me? And I look back on that story and I think, when Peter was a little bit older, was he telling people this story, and did he tell it a little bit differently? My guess is when he tells the story, he's saying, wow, this is incredible what happened. You should have been there. I was so brave. I jumped out on the water. Regardless of how he told the story, it was an epic moment. It was a milestone in the life of Peter, because he was unafraid to jump out of the boat, to walk on the water. When I was in junior high, I went on my first mission trip. And I went down to Mexico, and as a junior hire, I was terrified. How is this going to go? I don't speak the language. I don't know the culture. And I got put into a host home, meaning I lived with the family for like 2 days. That was it. But it was just me. There was nobody else with me. And I remember being so uncomfortable and so afraid, but I did it anyway. And I look back on that moment, and I see that that was a moment that God did an incredible work in my life. That I learned a lot about who I was, I learned a lot about who God was, and I fell in love with people in different cultures. And from that moment on, I would go on mission trips whenever I had opportunity and continue to grow in my faith by taking these steps, because I learned that God can be trusted and God is faithful. And oftentimes, it's not until we do something that's uncomfortable, something that we're not totally familiar with, something that's different, but we're going to trust God with it, that we grow in these kinds of relationships and in our understanding of God's faithfulness. And so my question for the groups, just to kind of kick off the conversation today, is what is one time you did something that you were super terrified to do, but you did it anyway? You were afraid, but you chose to jump anyway. How did that go? So tell a time that you were afraid, but you did something anyway. Enjoy the conversation.